Hello interwebs, welcome to Adamant IT. Today we're going to be talking about full body tracking in VR. And I'm going to be making some full body trackers in various designs and sharing my thoughts on them with you. Now I actually made a video about this about a year ago. I was using Slime VR to make my own full body tracking system for VR chat, although it also works with other systems. And these body trackers were kind of interesting because they don't require lighthouses and they're an awful lot cheaper than HTC Vive trackers are, which is what a lot of people use. And in that video, I talked about how the system worked and the principles behind IMU body tracking. So if you want to know the details on how it works and the background to that, I suggest going back and watching my other video first for that. And in that video, I made my own trackers that were just really ghetto designs. It was basically just the electronics just strapped to a battery and just then strapped onto a limb. And that's the interesting thing about Slime VR. Because it's an open source project, you can make your very own designs, and I did do that. And they worked pretty good. But these days I use a much better set that I've designed myself, and there are actually lots and lots of other designs that you can make and are recommended. And I really like looking at these other designs because each of them have their own strengths and weaknesses, and it's really fun to see other takes on there, what people are prioritizing for each design, and how each one is good for different situations. The most popular designs these days use what's known as a carrier PCB, whereas instead of wiring the separate modules together with jumper wires like I did in my other video, we just simply get custom-made PCBs. So with the help of JLCPCB, who was sponsoring this video, we're going to order our own custom PCBs, and I'm going to make 3 of the most popular designs, as well as my very own design that I did myself. So let's get into it. This video is sponsored by JLCPCB. JLC supply 1 to 8 layer PCBs starting from just $2 with lead times as fast as 24 hours and additional discounts for new customers. Everything is done in-house from supply to the final product, ensuring consistent quality for prototypes and large orders alike. Ordering is fast and simple for just bare PCBs or with their full assembly service where you supply your PCB files and a bill of materials, and they'll supply all of the parts and ship a fully soldered PCB directly to your door. This month is JLC PCB's Engineers Day, where you can get up to $125 off in coupons, as well as Amazon gift cards with bulk orders. I've been using JLC for the past year now, and for Engineers Day I've been doing extra testing on all of the Slime VR projects that I'm going to be looking at in this video, thanks to JLC's service. Check the link in the description for more information, and thank you once again to JLC PCB for sponsoring this video. So I've got 4 designs to show you guys today in this video, and I'm going to talk about the pros and cons of each of them and show you how to order the parts and assemble each and every one of them. So there are more designs out there in the DIY community than this, many more designs. However, I can only show so many of them in one video, and these are just the most popular ones. So you'll notice that these all have something in common, and that is that they all use a custom PCB. And the PCB is often known as a carrier PCB because on slimes you generally use pre-made modules such as this D1 Mini ESP here. So most of the time we're using a custom-made PCB that we solder the modules to save on having to do hand wiring. And an example of hand wiring would be something like this monstrosity here. So carrier PCBs are the meta now. Now you can absolutely still hand wire your slimes if you want to, but having a carrier PCB makes assembly 10 times easier, and it also makes them a great deal neater and a great deal more reliable as well. And they barely have any cost impact. So it really is kind of a no-brainer to use one of the carrier PCB designs these days. So I'm going to do some montages of the actual build process themselves to keep the runtime of this video down. However, I'll be doing a full uncut build video for each one of these that will get posted on the second channel. Check in the description down below to see links to those and the second channel itself. So the first rule of building DIY slimes is that each design will usually have some parts that are specific to that design. So it's really important to decide what design you want to build before you order parts. A really good example of that is in the Switch. While this Cheesecake and this TinySlime both have little SMD switches on them, the Arctic Slime here has a vertical micro switch, and the MeowCarrier over here has a 90-degree micro switch on it. So we've got 3 different switches here from the get-go. And if we go to other designs like this older Hyperion, this one's got a big old SS24 switch on it. So it's really important to decide what you're actually going to make before you go out and order parts. So let's take an example. In this case, I'm going to pick the MeowCarrier here, and let's do a rundown of all of the parts in this tracker and how to add those all to your basket. Now, we're going to be ordering most of our parts from AliExpress. And the reason why I've chosen AliExpress is they have all of the parts, they have them at very good prices, and the shipping times on them are pretty darn respectable. So it's a reliable location to get everything you need from. You can go to other electronic suppliers if you want. You can even find quite a few of the bits and pieces on Amazon, but just realize you're probably going to pay significantly more for them there. So let's start with our microcontroller, which is this guy here. So on the MeowCarrier, this is the ESP8266, and this particular version of it is called the D1 Mini. It's a very, very common breakout board for this ESP that provides our microcontroller with a USB interface on it, so we can actually program this thing with the firmware and everything. So let's search for that. So this is a D1 Mini, and the variations of this that we need to watch out for are the different version numbers. The 2 common version numbers are the V3 and the V4. Now, the V4 is a strange animal because the USB port is on the other side of it. So while it is a newer design and it has its advantages, it's generally not what we're looking for. You want a version 3. So let's pick this one here. They seem to have them very cheap, and it's also available with choice shipping, which means it's going to show up generally within 5 to 7 days for most people. And as you can see here, we can get it with a Type-C USB port or a micro USB port. And it's up to you which you go for. Personally, I prefer to get the micro USB ones. And the reason why I do that is because that way the firmware port is different to the charge port. And that makes it very easy to know which one is which, and to make sure that people don't accidentally try and charge over the firmware port, which isn't going to work. So this one was $1.82, but if I just add PCS, which is short for pieces, into my search term, we'll find that people are selling them in 10 pieces at a time. So we can bulk order and we can save money here. You can also get them in 20 pieces if you want. However, we're going to spec for building a set of 10 here. So let's select this one. And as you can see, this comes in at $16, so we're down to $1.60 per unit. So we've saved a bit of money. And I can save a little bit more by getting the micro USB ones because no one wants the micro USB ones. Add to cart. So the next item on our list is this TP4056 module here. And this is our battery charger module. It does 2 things. It takes a USB input and charges the internal battery that's underneath the circuit board. And it also provides protection from the battery, ensuring that the battery doesn't get overcharged, over-discharged, or reverse charged, such as from the firmware port, if we've got that plugged in. And here we've got someone selling 10 pieces for $1.40. These things are really cheap. And there's quite a few different variations of the TP4056 board. There is a cut down version of it here that has less protection on it, and that's not the one we want. So we want to make sure we get, let's see, this one here. So this one is labeled as 18650 Type-C, and they've put in 18650 there because by default the 18650 is an unprotected cell, so you'd want the protection circuit. So this is what we want, the full one with the protection circuit and a Type-C connector. So 10 of those, $1.50, so they work out at 15 cents each. Add to cart. Next thing on our list are some diodes. So these diodes are protection for the battery. They ensure that the battery cannot be reverse charged or overcharged by the ESP in certain circumstances. I won't go into the details on that, but it's an interesting topic for another day. So these are 1N5817 diodes. It's a Schottky diode that has a low forward voltage on it. And it's really important that you get this number correct. 1N5817. And we can get 50 of those for $1.20. You can get 100 for $1.30 if you want, but I don't need 100 of them. I only need 10, so I'll take the 50 pieces. And once again, we need to make sure we select the right one here, because we could get all these other ones, but we want 1N5817. Add to cart. Next, we need this 180K resistor, and this is our battery sense resistor. It allows the ESP to check the voltage of the battery and estimate how much charge we have. 100 pieces for 68 cents. Yep, that'll do. And once again, we're going to make sure that we've selected the right value. 180K, there it is. Add to cart. Next up, we've got a power switch, and this particular switch is an SK12D07, which looks a little something like these. This person's selling 20 of them for 86 cents. Again, choice delivery, that looks pretty good. And the different size options here are just simply how much the switch sticks out. And the 3mm one is the recommended size. Add to cart. Now on my example build here, I've added in a battery connector, but this isn't actually standard for the MeowCarrier design, and I've actually reverse mounted this, which is a bit off model. So I'm not going to recommend this right now for simplicity's sake, but if you do desperately want a battery connector, jump in the Slime VR Discord and jump into the DIY channel, and people can help advise on how to achieve that. For now, we're going to skip the battery connector and we'll just solder our battery directly. So on the subject of the battery, the MeowCarrier uses a 503759 cell, and that number are the dimensions of the cell. So this is 5mm thick. It is 37mm wide and it's 59mm long. So that's how you calculate it. And that gives us 1200 milliamp hours. And on a slime tracker, it generally works out as 1 hour per 100 milliamp hour. So this will give us 12 hours of runtime, theoretically. Now, the battery is the most difficult part to source. Finding batteries like this at a decent price is extremely hard. I defy anyone to find these things at a reasonable cost anywhere other than AliExpress, especially if you want half-decent shipping times. You will not find these batteries on choice shipping. They often have extremely pessimistic delivery times. So whatever you do, once you've chosen what design you're going to build, you want to order your batteries as soon as you possibly can, because they will probably take at least 4 weeks to arrive. If you're lucky, they might show up a little bit quicker, but 4 weeks is pretty standard. I've had to wait 6 weeks before, so keep that in mind. Now, this seller here has got is looking at $27 for sets, and we can order them with a connector or without a connector. So as mentioned, it's up to you whether you use a connector or not, and also, as I said, for simplicity, we're going to go with the reference design, which is a soldered-on battery. So I'm going to go 10 pieces, no connector, and $27 works out at $2.70 per cell. And that's not bad going, really. That's pretty standard. We can dig around and we might be able to find some a little bit cheaper, but this is a good example. Add to cart. Now, the next part of our tracker is this fella. This is the IMU, and this is basically our motion sensor and accelerometer that actually detects the movement of the tracker. And there are various options for this available, so I'm going to quickly fly through the most common options right now. One of the most popular ones right now is the BMI 270, which is this chap here. It's excellent value for money and provides decent performance. So this is generally a recommended go-to. Another very popular option is this chap here. This is the BNO 085. It's a very high-performing IMU and is very recommended. The drawback of it is that it's extremely expensive. To put things in perspective, a BMI 270 is about $3 or so, whereas a B&O 085 is $12. So obviously, if you're building with these, that is a considerable additional cost onto your build. And we're talking $3 per tracker or $12 per tracker. So if you're building a set of 10 of these, that's $120 just on the IMUs. So while this guy is really high performing, it's also shockingly expensive. So that brings around other options as well. The new kids on the block are the LSM series, specifically the LSM6 DSO, like this one, or the LSM6 DSV, which is a slightly higher performing counterpart. The DSO is slightly better than a BMI 270, and the DSV can apparently give a B&O a bloody nose. However, the LSMs are very new and they're considered experimental, so use them at your own risk. For my example, I'm going to use the BMI 270, and this is most easily available from Kouno Labs, and I'll link to them down below. It's run by Maya, who is a community member who specifically gets these things built and sourced from China. Very good value for money. They are all pre-tested before shipping, so it means that you get reliable ones, no DOAs. We've also got the case that we're going to put the tracker in. Now, most trackers are built in 3D printed cases like this. This MeowCarrier case is freely available to download, and you can print this on basically any FDM 3D printer. I printed mine using my Creality Ender 5, and you can do them in any color you like, basically. This is a great point of customization. If you're savvy, you can also design your own lid and put on either what limb the tracker goes on, or you can put on logos or do it in a different color and stuff like that. You can also go to 3D printing services and have these printed for you. Or again, if you go to the Slime VR Discord, in the marketplace area, there are often people who are selling pre-printed cases for you. If you really want to avoid the 3D printing aspect of it, I have a design here called Arctic Slime, which is my own design, which does not require a case. One of the upsides of this one, which I'll be talking about, is the fact that it is a caseless design. So we'll come back to that one later on. Finally, we're going to need our carrier PCB. So we're going to get these from JLCPCB. So I'm going to show you how to do that in a minute. But firstly, let's just round up our AliExpress cart. So now if we check in our cart, we've got our batteries, we've got a switch, we've got our resistor, our diode, our battery charger, and our microcontroller. So these are all the parts that we're going to be getting from AliExpress. So go ahead and check those out and get those on delivery. So in order to order our PCB, we first need to download the files for it. So once again, following the MeowCarrier example that I've been doing, I've gone to the GitHub page for the MeowCarrier, which is by ShineBright. And these GitHubs are incredibly useful resources for building slime trackers, as a lot of the designers like ShineBright have done full walkthroughs for everything in the GitHub, with full walkthroughs on where to get all the parts, how to do everything. So that's another really good written guide that you can also follow. But for now, all I'm interested in are the PCB files. So I'll click on PCB here, and there's two options for this one. There's the original version, and then there's the PH version. And this one has holes to fit a battery connected to, which is the one that you've seen in my examples. Or this one just has flat pads for soldering the wires to. So for the time being, I'll just select the standard MeowCarrier without the holes in it. And this will be a zip file, so we'll just download the raw zip file. Now I'm going to head on over to JLCPCB, and I'll click Order Now up the top here. And I'll click Add Gerber File, and I'll specify the whole zip file that I downloaded. So I'm going to specify meowcarrier.zip. And straight away, as you can see, we get a preview image of what it's going to look like. So you can see that the board looks like what we're expecting. And now we can select our options for this. So we're just going to be using an FR4 2-layer board here. It's automatically set the dimensions based on the board that I've uploaded. And I'm going to want 10 of these, so I'll select 10. Then I'm also going to select 1mm PCBs, which gets the thickness of it down just a little bit and gives us a bit more room inside the case. And if you want to, you can select from a variety of different colors. Keep in mind that the color will affect the price and shipping time slightly. So if I select, say, purple instead, we get the same price, but the assembly time goes up by a day or two. So it's up to you whether that's acceptable or not. Considering you're going to be waiting a couple of weeks for all of your other parts, personally, I think it's worth waiting a little bit more time to get your PCBs in a funky color. So you can select from any one of these ones here. You could go white or black as well, which makes for a really funky look as well. So I'm going to leave this on purple for now, just for the sake of it. And a little bit further down here, it says mark on PCB, and this is where they're going to put the order number. And what we're going to do, we're going to change this to order number specify position. And what will have happened is on the PCB design files, the PCB designers, so in this case ShineBright, have already specified a location where the order number goes, so it's put in a discrete place where it won't be noticed. And this is a completely free option, just to put it in a discrete location. So we'll select that as well, and that makes sure that the order number won't be plastered in big letters somewhere in the middle of the board. And our base price for this comes in at just $5. $5 for custom-made PCBs. Now, the shipping will cost a little bit more. However, you can play a little bit of a game here as well. If we save this to the cart, and once you go through to checkout, under the shipping method, you can select the slow shipping method, and you can get really cheap shipping on that as well. And that means that your total cost is probably going to come in at sub $10. And sure, that's going to take a little bit longer, but as I mentioned earlier on, your other components are probably going to take a couple of weeks to arrive as well. So this doesn't change your total wait time in general. So now we've got our beautiful custom-made PCBs here that look awfully pretty. We're going to start actually building these up. So again, keeping with the theme, I'm going to build up this ShineBright MeowCarrier. So the tools that I'm going to need to do this, the absolute bare essentials are a soldering iron. We'll also need some solder. Here's my spool of solder. And some cutters. And that's basically the bare essentials you need to build one of these through-hole ones. Other useful things can also include, for example, if we're doing the SMD TinySlime, you might want some solder wick for removing solder, or a desoldering pump like this guy, and some tweezers are also helpful. There's lots of other tools that can be extremely useful when soldering. However, I'm not going to go into all of them in detail because it's outside the scope of this video. But the bare essentials for the through-hole MeowCarrier is just some cutters, a soldering iron, and some solder. So I'm going to mount this up in a vise because it makes it easy to film while I'm actually soldering it, and it also just makes it easier to solder. And we'll do a quick speed run of this while I give some commentary on what I'm putting where. I start out by flush mounting the TP4056 module. I can use some pin headers to hold it in place while I tack it down, and then just flood fill the holes. The MeowCarrier has huge tolerances for alignment, so we don't need to be perfect. Next, I'll add the switch and tack it in place. We'll solder the other pins on the bottom in a moment. Now I'll bend the legs on the resistor and diodes and place them. The stripe on the diodes should point to the middle of the board. The resistor can go either way around. You can solder the legs of these parts from either side. I find it easier from the top as it stops them from falling out when you turn the board over. Then I'll trim the legs from underneath. Next, I'll turn the board over and place the pin header strips, tacking down one pin to hold them in place. Once they're in, I'll reflow the single pin to make sure they're straight, and then solder the rest of the pins. I'll do the switch pins while I'm here too. Now we place the D1 Mini and solder the pins. Only 8 of these pins are actually needed, denoted with dots on the PCB. Leaving the other pins dry can make the board easier to remove if you're troubleshooting or if you want less work to do. Finally, I'll place the IMU. I'll tack down one pin, reflow it to straighten, and then solder the other pins. Now we're going to trim the pin headers down. Cover the pin as you cut it, as they can take your eye out if you're not careful. After this, I'll reflow all of the pins again just to neaten them up and prevent any cracked joins from cutting the pins. To connect the battery, I'll add some solder to the holes and then reflow it as I push the wire in. Pay close attention to make sure the wires do not touch each other. The cells we're using have short circuit protection, but obviously the tracker won't work if the battery is shorted. Now place everything into the case. Don't forget the separator, as this protects the battery from spikes on the bottom of the PCB.
And there's our finished tracker, everyone. So, this is the Shine Bright MeowCarrier. And this, in my opinion, is basically the final form of the Hyperion design, which is a very old school design, which went through several iterations of optimization. And then finally, Shine Bright, who had been contributing to that project, did some more rearranging to move things around, made it a little bit smaller, and we ended up with the MeowCarrier. This is basically as small as you can go with this size cell. You can see that the size of the box is the size of the battery that we're putting in there. So even though you could probably squeeze this PCB a tiny bit smaller, there is no more room to save because we are as small as the battery we're using. This design is handy because it uses all the common parts such as through-hole components, the TP4056 and a D1 Mini. This is a very tried and tested microcontroller, and all the other components are extremely tried and tested as well. So it's very reliable, very simple to build. The case itself is really rugged because it's just a square box, and it's got really strong strap loops that will not snap even if you're laying on top of them. So these are really good. They're also 50mm wide, so you can have nice thick straps, which makes the tracker more stable when you've got it on a leg or an arm. It isn't the smallest design available. We'll be looking at the TinySlime, which is even smaller than this. However, it's extremely accessible. It's very easy to build, which makes this an ideal design for first-time builders. Anytime someone comes to me or goes to the Slime Discord DIY room and says, I want to build slime trackers, what design should I use? The response will be MeowCarrier, because this is the most accessible design and it's an incredibly good all-rounder. I'll just put the lid on top of that. And bam, there's our little box. Done and done. Next up is the Gorbit TinySlime. Now, this guy is going to be slightly different because this is an SMD board. Now, this is large SMD, so if you've never done surface mount soldering before, then this isn't super difficult. However, if you've never soldered before, this one's going to be tricky, and I don't recommend this being your first soldering experience. Or if you've got your heart set on this design, then I would recommend doing practice soldering on other things first. Don't make this your first soldering experience, because unless you've got really good equipment, you might run into trouble.
and that's our built TinySlime. So the TinySlime is basically the smallest module-based tracker that is currently well known. It uses the smaller C3 Super Mini ESP. It uses the smaller TP4056 charge board, and it uses a square 804040 battery that is a bit shorter in width and length, but a bit thicker. And you're going to be really hard pushed to find another DIY tracker design that uses off-the-shelf modules like this and clocks in at a smaller overall design footprint. Cheesecake is smaller, but requires a custom-made PCB, which we'll look at a bit later. Being SMD soldered makes it a little bit more challenging to build, but it does mean that the overall height comes down. So despite the fact that we've got a thicker battery by 3mm than the MeowCarrier, we actually come in at a little bit shorter than the MeowCarrier. So we end up with more battery capacity in a smaller overall package, and that's the trade-off. The only other major issue is that this C3 Mini, although it's smaller, the antenna on this guy sucks, and these things have noticeably worse signal strength than something that uses the D1 Mini like the MeowCarrier. The DIY community is working on solutions to this, but as of the recording of this video, there's nothing set in stone yet. They're currently investigating custom antennas or a newer version of this that has an antenna connector on it that will maybe improve things. But as I say, these guys don't really work well unless you're at point blank range with your router, a la the router is in the same room as your VR play space. However, for people who are really insistent on wanting a really compact tracker that goes toe-to-toe with some of the commercial tracker designs in terms of size, this is what you're looking for. Now the next one we're going to build is my design. This is the Arctic Slime, and I made this. So this is based on a couple of ideas that I got from other tracker designs and brought together into my own one. So the original concept came from Frozen Slime, which is a old design for 18650 lithium ion cells. However, it's not very well optimized. It's really inefficient with space. It uses a built-in charger, despite the fact that it has a removable cell. And there are a couple of areas in the design that are just really questionable, like the way that the switch is mounted and stuff like that. So I thought, what if we took that concept and miniaturized it for a 14500 cell? So this uses a 14500 cell, and this is the size of a AA battery. And if we compare it versus an 18650, as you can see, it's much smaller. So this gives you something that doesn't have the big chunky 18650 cell on it. However, the catch is that this guy's only 800 milliamp hours, which isn't really a lot. An 18650, these are commonly 2000 milliamp hours, and if you buy expensive ones, you can easily get 3000 milliamp hours, or even a little bit more if you go exotic. So we take a big hit in capacity, but we end up with something that, as you can see, is really small. Here's the TinySlime for comparison. So as you can see, I actually have something that is competitive in size with TinySlime. The only catch is mine has half the capacity. However, because my cell is removable, I don't have to plug all of my trackers into USB cables to charge them. I just pop the batteries out and put them in a battery charger. Now, just to be clear, you can't put a AA alkaline battery in. This is a 3.7 volt nominal lithium ion cell. It's kind of an oddball battery size, but they do exist and they give you all the advantages of a AA battery while still having enough voltage to actually drive a widget.
And there we have the Adamant IT Arctic Slime. You'll notice we've got the C3 Super Mini on this, like the TinySlime has, so this again doesn't have great signal strength on it. An earlier version did actually use the D1 Mini, but I really wanted to go down to the C3 because I could make it much narrower and really get the size down. So that's what I went for. I have also designed an XL version of this one, which takes an 18650, and basically it's just got some slight extra bits on the side so it can handle a bigger cell. And the reason why I built that is that for a lot of people, they really don't want to buy LiPo cells from AliExpress, but 18650 cells are available from any street corner vape shop or just any hobbyist RC supplier. Now it's time for the darling design of third-party slime sellers everywhere. This is the Cheesecake by Sorakage. So this is a pre-made DIY design. What Sorakage did was design a fully built custom PCB. We're still using the ESP12F here, but you'll notice there's no carrier board here. It's soldered directly onto the PCB, and the IMU, that's a BMI 270 chip right there, is also just directly on the PCB with all of the supporting components around it. This works in exactly the same way as a regular DIY slime. It's just on a much smaller form factor because we don't have any of the modular boards taking up space. So this makes for a really small tracker design. Again, if I compare it versus the TinySlime, as you can see, we've got a smaller form factor once again. However, we lose a little bit of space because, for better or for worse, the way this one works is this can slide into this bracket here, which you put on your straps. So you can have this on your straps, and then that just slides in like so. And this makes for a really interesting design because this connector down here can be populated with some pogo pins. And that means you can just pop this out from your strap and you can put it into a little 3D printed dock with all the rest of your trackers. And this makes for a really cool design that gives you an experience almost like a proper commercially designed product. It's really neat, and of course you can print these in all colors with all the different covers and things like that. This is also a really good option if you want to do little to minimum soldering, because the only soldering we actually have to do here is just putting the battery on. And even then, I've seen some designs of the Cheesecake with a battery connector as well. So how do we get one of these? Well, this is where JLC comes in again with their PCB assembly service. So let me show you how you would order some of these. Now there are a couple of different versions of the Cheesecake made by Sorakage depending on what kind of IMU you want to use. So these all have different code names and things like that. One of the latest designs is the Blueberry, which uses the LSM6 DSV. So this is one of the favoured new IMUs that's up and coming. There's also the Choco Special version, and this is specifically designed for putting a Slime VR BNO085 on, although again, that requires some extra soldering. I'm going to go with the just original cheese version, which is what I've made here. So the original cheese uses a BMI 270, and we're going to need a couple of the files from here. We want this zip file, which has our Gerber files in. Remember how we got those for the other PCBs. But we also have two extra files here. We've got two Excel documents. We've got a bill of materials and a pick and place file. So I'm going to download all three of these. Once again, I'll click on it, and I'll click on the download raw file button in the top right of the screen. And now we're going to go back over to JLC and hit order now. And I'm going to upload the Gerber file first of all. So here's our Gerber file, and as you can see, we now have something that looks like a cheesecake. So we're going to want, once again, I'm going to order 10 of these. And I'm going to select a 1mm thick PCB. And once again, you can get them in different colors if you want. So I selected black for mine. And I'll also select specify location for the order number. So this gets us our raw PCB like we did before. But now we're going to do the extra steps. So we're going to say, yes, I want PCB assembly. We're going to assemble top side only, and we can leave everything else at the defaults. So let's hit next. So here's our PCB preview. I'll hit next again. And now I'm going to add the bill of materials file. and I'll add our pick and place file. So we'll hit process. So now it's formed a list of all of the parts that we want to put on our board, and we can go through and check the price and the availability on everything. And as you can see, JLC have automatically sourced everything we need because they have their own parts company. If you're doing other PCB assembly and you need weird exotic custom components, you can have them import stuff for you as well. You can purchase stuff from a third-party supplier and have it sent directly to JLC for assembly. However, in this case, JLC have everything we need already. The only part they don't have is J1, and that is our dock connector jumper. So we're not going to add those to our particular design for now. Those can be added at a later date. So when we hit next, they're going to say, hey, by the way, you've got something that hasn't been selected. And I'm going to say, that's fine, don't place it. And now we've automatically got this fully rendered 3D model of the board showing us exactly what we're going to get. So as you can see, everything has been positioned. J1 is this connector down here, so we haven't put anything there. That's all fine. And that's ready to go. It even shows us the back half with nothing on it when we look at the back of the board. And for import reasons, we have to tell them what this is that we're asking them to make. So I'm going to call this just a controller. So let's just call that an other, and I will call it a VR controller. Save to cart. And as you can see, we've got two things that we're adding to our cart now. We've got our custom PCB and our assembly service. So hit checkout, go through with your payment details, and your fully assembled PCBs will be on their way to you. So because these are pre-manufactured, there's a lot less actual assembly work that you as the user have to do, and that can be really appealing to some people. But one of the big drawbacks of these guys is that if you have any problems with them electronically, they're a lot harder to diagnose. Because, for example, if you get a bad IMU on there, if you just happen to get a bad BMI 270 chip, then you're kind of out of luck unless you know how to do SMD rework and you have a hot plate. And that's one of the things that makes these kind of troublesome as slimes to purchase as well. You can get a really tidy package that is really nicely designed, but if there's any problems with it, you're very unlikely to be able to fix them yourself unless you happen to be an expert solderer. And if you do know soldering, you might find it more interesting to build some of the other designs yourself that require more hands-on work, because part of the fun of all of this is just the fun of building something. So that's my opinions on the current state of the slime DIY meta in 2024. The choice of IMU is always shifting, and the different designs are always coming and going. So if you're planning on building, I do highly recommend jumping in the Slime VR Discord and getting some advice, seeing what's currently around before you start. But hopefully this has given you some ideas on what's currently around and just what it takes to build your own DIY slimes from scratch, as well as getting all of the parts. Thanks once again to JLCPCB for sponsoring this video, and also a big thank you to my patrons and my Twitch subscribers and YouTube channel members who support my other video content as well. Do check out all the links below, including my second channel, where I post just random other videos with soldering tips and stuff like that. It's generally going to be a dumping ground for my experimentation with this. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you next time. Bye.